Hey guys, Lenny Reed, Dynomite Diesel Products. So, we found ourselves the holy grail of second gen 12 valve trucks. 1998, 5-speed, 215 pump, 187,000 miles on the truck. Back in the old day, this was set up to do things like tow and drive really well. Injection pump has been unmolested, meaning all the breakoff bolts are still in it, nobody's pulled the fuel plate out of it, nobody's adjusted the fuel plate. I don't know if anybody's checked the timing or adjusted the timing. The only thing I do know is the clutch is definitely stock, and it's got a pack brake exhaust brake on it, stock turbocharger. Somebody has put one of those little adjustable elbows in it to increase the boost pressure, and that was probably to offset the exhaust gas temperature because it does have gauges in it due to the bigger injectors. So on my old Dynojet Dyno, this truck stock would make 195 to maybe 202, 203 horsepower. Stock size, like, you know, this came with like a Michelin tire, but these are Coopers. They're still just a multi-rib tire. So this thing had come in really close to 200 horsepower on my Dynojet. That was an inertia. It was a big inertia. It was 99 slugs mass of inertia, so it was the most inertia that Dynojet ever made. 60-inch rollers, huge steel plates in them. It was, you know, what I felt to be the most accurate dyno on the planet back then. Matt, camera guy, used inertia only on this dyno for the first hit, and it came up with like 203 horsepower, and I think it was 404 foot-pounds of torque. Inertia only. We added load, went to 30%, thinking that was going to be a good number to really put some heat and make some big boost numbers. 30% would actually stall the motor between gears and it wouldn't recover after that. So we ended up finding that with a 200 horsepower truck, 10% of load from the eddy brakes was the sweet spot for this pickup truck. It jumped up 100 horsepower and it made 310 horsepower to the rear axle, not the rear tire, because there is no tire. Tire sitting right by the camera. It went from 400 foot-pounds of torque up to about 600, like 605, 610, somewhere in there. And that was peak numbers. Really cool to see that just inertia, which didn't make a lot of boost, it didn't create a lot of heat. The Dyno Run was very quick, 10% of load, and it slowed down the everything. Ran it from the same mile per hour up to the same mile per hour, and just by adding the load, we were able to pick up that kind of power. So the next goal is something that we need to have Dynocom come out and help us with. So they are putting somebody on a representative on an airplane. They're going to fly them up here and go through a bunch of this stuff. This dyno, all the gas testing equipment, we've got air-fuel ratio to measure from 0 up to 240 to 1. So far leaner than we're ever going to need to measure, but air-fuel ratio and EGT have a direct correlation. So all of the data that we can collect and start to accumulate, some of the differences between dynos so far in the last 25 years basically, very small drums, didn't really hold a whole lot of power, contact patch on the tire was not very good, so a bigger roller made for a better contact patch, plus it was a heavier roller, and it helped spool up turbocharged diesel trucks. And I will say that like my Dynojet versus a Superflow that was at UCC was within 15, 20 horsepower, and that's leaving Idaho heading clear over to Indianapolis using the exact same tank of fuel. We're within 15, 20. So I felt like that Dynojet and the Superflows were basically pretty close to one another. I am concerned that anything over about 2,000 horsepower, anything with a rubber contact patch is going to be compromised. You're not going to get all the traction there. Too many question marks. So going to a hub dyno seemed like the next natural alternative, since a lot of us are making over 2,000 horsepower. And here at Dynomite, like our biggest focus at this point is trying to make trucks as efficient as possible. Fuel being, you know, $6, $6.50 a gallon, maybe even over $7 a gallon. If we can save you fuel economy, then I feel like as a long-term investment, these trucks, I mean, you guys are looking at the price of these trucks. They're now going for, I paid as much for this truck used, 187,000 miles, as this truck was brand new. And I feel like I got a good deal. This truck's already, we're gonna time it, pull the motor out of it, throw all new gaskets in it. It's actually not leaking yet, but by the time we're done with it and I give it to my electrician and let him go drive it for the next 10 years, this thing's gonna have leaks coming out everywhere. So instead of giving it to him in that position, we're just gonna tug the motor out of it, freshen up all the gaskets, make sure everything's perfect, set it up with some new injectors, throw some governor springs at it, find the sweet spot for timing to make sure that we're managing exhaust gas temperature and sizing that with, we're gonna use factory fuel plate, we're gonna give him his exhaust brake back, we're gonna make this thing just a perfect little tow truck by sizing injectors correctly. Back in the day when this truck was new, everything was basically a VCO style nozzle, and now that we have SAC style blanks with DLC coated needle valves, injection event's gonna happen faster. We can control the hole size within 1/10 of 1/1000th of 1 inch, and then we can like push AFM through them to make sure we get the K factor perfect. I fully expect that we're gonna be like most states that are still checking opacity are gonna be like letting you run up to 30 parts per million. We are gonna ship this truck at 30 parts per million or less than, and my goal is to make sure that a stock HX35, capable of supporting 350 horsepower, but ultimately I plan on shipping this truck more than 300, less than 350 on the factory turbocharger, factory turbo wheel, factory compressor wheel, all of that stuff's gonna remain. Only drawback is whenever you put an exhaust brake to the back of the turbocharger, even with the butterfly valve full open, you're still disturbing and you're hindering some of the exhaust gas flow leaving that turbine wheel. So we'll have to measure drive pressure and see where that starts to tip over. And if drive pressure is really angry at 300 horsepower, then we're gonna leave it at 300, but we're gonna make sure it's 300 horsepower for like 1,000 RPM, not 300 horsepower for 200 or 300 RPM, because that's just not very fun to drive. So that's a little bit about the truck. We're gonna call this thing Redhead Stepchild because it is bright red. And, but man, it's so clean. Like inside the cab, very nice. Dashboard's not cracked, it's not busted. I've seen this truck, and basically the gentleman who owned this truck he offered to sell it to me about probably 5 years ago. And at that point, I didn't feel it was worth the money that he was asking for it. And I've brought him a few buyers that were just a couple of $1,000s within his asking price. He always said no, turned them away. And here recently, with what these trucks are now pulling, the money that he wanted, it's now finally a fair figure. So he got what he wanted. I have a truck. We're gonna be able to show you how to make the perfect tow truck out of an old 98 12 valve 215 truck and still get really good fuel economy as well. Gas testing equipment, this truck, of course, Matt, Skylar, everybody wants to like start dynoing 1,000, 1,500, 1,700, 2,000 horsepower hits because we have the baddest dyno on the planet. I want to make sure that if we don't know how to use the dyno correctly, we're not just instantly breaking and blowing stuff up. So I want to, start with 300 horsepower, get really good, start to recognize what the data looks like, start to make sure that we're understanding what this tool is actually capable of. So that's why we're going to do this thing first. So follow us along for this build, but now we're going to change gears. We're going to talk about dyno. The dyno, Dynocom pod, each one of these pods is about 3,500 pounds, and it's got outriggers on it. So when the outriggers are pulled up, one dude can move this around. Two dudes can move it around pretty well. Concrete floor was poured for this intention, so the floor was lasered and shot flat. This is our Dyno Cell. This is what this room was built for, is exactly this purpose. We've got 2 eddy brakes per pontoon, so 4 eddy brakes total. We can hold about 5,000 horsepower. Well, we can measure 5,500 horsepower to the rear axle. So far more than any, I say this, far more than any, like what I would say Dodge, Cummins, Duramax, Power Stroke is ever gonna make. But here we are, we've got the ability, we should never run out of tool. We've got all the gases to be measured. When you're on an engine dyno, what you'll do is you'll start a hit, say with this turbocharger, we're gonna start hits at say 1,200 RPM, and we're gonna run it up to about 3,000 RPM. And that way we can see what the drivability on the street's gonna look like. If you let the clutch out at 1,000 RPM, obviously it's not making boost, but you wanna know if it's gonna start making boost at 12, 13, 14, 1500 RPM. To measure that drivability, our hits, we can start recording and start loading, applying load. So it'll be inertia only until we say set at 1500 or 1400. And then we can capture all the data, clear up to 3000. Once we get to 3000, every single time, the dyno's gonna release the load, you're gonna get off the gas pedal, record data, same hit every time. Adjust the pump, adjust the injector, adjust whatever you want, do the same hit every single time, same data, and you're just measuring what modifications you've made. I'm really big on like making one adjustment at a time. With having this much accuracy, with being able to slow it down, for those of you that have never been in an engine dyno cell, most oftentimes when you go to an engine dyno cell, you'll capture, say, a 3,000 to 4,000 RPM hit, meaning you start rolling into it from idle up to 2,000, 2,800, and the water brake or the eddy current brake doesn't actually capture until you finally get to that 3,000 RPM set point that you set. At 3,000 RPM, the dyno's already seen the rate of acceleration. It captures it, and it allows you, and this is again set by you, the dyno operator, 200, 250, 300 RPM per second. So if you're gonna capture a 1,000 RPM window, you're gonna give it, say, 200 RPM per second, 200 RPM, 400 RPM, 600 RPM, 800 RPM. So you're gonna be under full load, full boost for a total of 5 seconds to grab that 1,000 RPM. With inertia, once you're making big power, you drive through the inertia so quickly, you never make full drive pressure, you never make full turbo temperature, you never make full boost. You're not capturing possibly all of what was available to capture. But when you go to a dyno day, if everybody is using the same yardstick, you can't really complain. You can say, well, I was only making 60 pounds of boost when I normally make 100 pounds of boost. That is a complaint. But using that dyno, everybody that you're competing against that day has the same disadvantage, so it just is what it is. With something like this, at 30%, this truck, a 300 horsepower truck would not dyno 30% load. There is too much load for 300 horsepower. We will learn how much load we can add with each horsepower going up. But right now I can tell you for a fact, 30% was not gonna, this truck doesn't have enough jam to drive through it, so it doesn't work. Very soon, when we start capturing these dyno hits just like we're on the engine dyno, it's gonna be more accurate data. We're gonna be able to bring up that turbo to full temperature, bring it up to full boost, and measure real drive pressure. So those are all things that if we're gonna be adjusting wastegates, or if we're running nitrous hits and we need to adjust the wastegate with the nitrous hit, like with Skylar's truck, for instance, we'll be able to set that stuff up here in the bay before we take it to the track and then possibly hurt the turbocharger at the track. That's been something that it's happened a lot. And some of these ball bearing turbos, they do not like to be oversped. So if you overspeed it just once, it pops. $4,000 mistake, but you know, Bob's your uncle. That's the game. Very excited about this tool. It's gonna be great. For now, I'm done talking. I'm gonna let Matt take over and make a couple of hits just to show you guys what this thing's all about. One of the things you'll notice is like there's no road noise because now we just have hubs and we're trapping all the energy at the hub instead of at the tire. So there's no more tire to steel drum contact, makes it a little bit quieter. So inside this bay, which is very well insulated, it'll be noisy in here, but outside the building, not really noisy at all. Just really cool tool. I'm super excited about it. So I'm out of here. All right, so right now we've got the dyno set up to start recording at 55 miles an hour, and it's going to shut itself off at 105 miles an hour. Right now I'm inertia only. There's zero load applied. And at 55, it's gonna hit me with 3% of load. And it's gonna work its way up to 9% load at 105 miles an hour. What's cool about that is it's so consistent, it takes all the human error out of it. So we are going to roll up a window. Maybe you guys can hear me better. So I'm in 4th gear right now, doing 25 mile an hour, and we got 0 load still. I'm gonna get it in 5th gear here in a second. Oop, crept up to 50 really quick. Now the trick for me is when I hit 55 and it hits 3% load, at that point I will already have clicked the record button, and load will start coming on progressively, but that's completely programmed and I'm out of control of that. So here's my very first run, 1998 Dodge 215 truck. Here we go. Boom, done. First run in the books.